Day before Christmas and all through the house. Okay, I won't be doing any poetry or anything like that. But we're in the holiday season, definitely. And for those of you who are traveling, wish you safe travels and a safe return. But yeah, some of our folks will be doing some traveling this week. Some have already taken off to be with family, and so we wish them the best. And same to you all, to everyone who is here and listening online. We are continuing our journey through Acts, and we are at chapter 12. And we've seen some interesting things happen for uh, most of the narrative up to this point. The center and the focus of the church has been in Jerusalem, but that has changed as folks who have scattered and gone into other parts, especially into the Gentile areas, have been teaching and preaching and converting people, and all to the good. And in fact, there's a congregation that or a church body that builds up in the city of Antioch, which is the one of the prominent cities in the empire. Very very pagan-esque, probably not a city that would come to mind if you were thinking about where to go establish a church. Your first thought would be, oh gee, this place is so decadent, so corrupt, uh, so paganistic, and yet what better place than to start a church or a congregation? And that's exactly what happens. Not only is a church planted there, it grows and it thrives. And the church in Jerusalem sends Barnabas to check things out in a positive spirit. Remember earlier when Peter spoke to some Gentiles and they were converted, there was this shock of, Peter, you're out of your mind. What are you doing talking to those Gentiles? Until Peter explained things. He said, hey, I didn't do this on my own. I was directed to by the Holy Spirit. Oh, okay. Well, that's different. And so Barnabas, the ambassador from the Jerusalem church, checks things out in Antioch and gives a good report. Not only that, he takes a little boat cruise across the Mediterranean to Tarsus, the hometown of a guy by the name of Saul, a relatively recent convert, but who has been spending some time there. Uh, Barnabas gets Saul, brings him back to Antioch, and they work for about a year or so with the church in Antioch. And the church continues to grow. In fact, it becomes the epicenter of church operations, so much so that when there is a dire prophecy of a coming famine that's going to upset the entire Roman Empire, um, the Antioch church takes up funds, says, we know the brethren, the brothers and sisters back in Jerusalem are going to need this. So Barnabas and Saul, would you mind carrying that back on our behalf? And they do. And Luke notes that the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. Probably it started as a joke, kind of as an insult, one of those, oh, those Christians kind of thing. And it's an insult that basically turns into a point of pride. Yeah, we're Christians and we're not afraid to confess it. And so uh, the church continues to grow and it continues to prosper. And many good things had happen. And of course, whenever the church seems to be uh, in a period of good times and prosperity and growth and so forth, what happens? Persecution. That's right. Thank you, Rob. Sooner or later, Satan says, I got to do something about this, and he does. As we get into chapter 12, Luke continues his story. He says, Now, it was about this time that King Herod arrested or laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. A lot of stuff that's packed in there in those verses. Let's go back and take a look at this. Obviously, the prosecution or persecution has returned to the church. Satan just can't let things go on like that. And so King Herod is the agent of that persecution. He's arresting people, arresting members of the church. Not just any members of the church. He arrests James, the brother of John. Okay, who is this? Well, James, the brother of John, the sons of Zebedee, or as Jesus once called them or referred to them, the sons of thunder. James, not only one of the apostles, but also part of Jesus's inner circle. How many times when we read about Jesus going to perform a miracle, like raising a young girl from the dead, who accompanies him? Peter, James, and John. Who is present with Jesus during the moment of transfiguration up on Mount Zion? Peter, James, and John. And you kind of look at that and you think, gee, these are the 3 most important people in Jesus's crew. Nothing could possibly happen to them. Well, wrong. James is not only arrested, he's put to death for no good reason. And put to death with the sword, and you can probably read that as he was beheaded, like John the Baptist. And Peter looks like he is bound for the same fate himself. Well, and the agent of carrying this out is a guy named King Herod. Gee, where have we heard that name before? Well, this is another King Herod. So many Herods, so little time, and so little mention of who exactly they are in the Bible. This Herod is probably at least the 3rd in a line of Herods that we're aware of. He is the grandson of Herod the Great. He's the guy back in the opening chapters of Matthew who gets upset when he hears about the Christ child being born. And when he's outwitted by the Magi, he orders this massive execution of all infants 2 years and younger in hopes of wiping out the Christ and putting to death the Christ child, the new King of the Jews, the one who could pose a threat to him. This was the type of family that this Herod descended from. No one was safe under a Herod, not even members of the family. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but just for now, we'll just say that this King Herod was a bad dude. And yes, they called him king. That did not make him an absolute ruler. He was king by the mercy of and by the grace of the Roman government. He was not so much a king as he was, at least in terms of our current form of government. He would be comparable to, say, like a governor. And his realm extended over the province of Judea. And he ruled by the grace of the Roman Empire, which basically was along the lines of, as long as you keep law and order in this town, in this province, we'll let you stick around. As long as you keep the natives quiet and you don't do anything that displeases the emperor, then you can call yourself anything you want, which he did. So he was known as King Herod, and apparently the whole point, the whole reason why he started persecuting the church was it was a political move, apparently, because Luke notes that verse 3, what he did, the execution of James, meets with approval among the Jews, and specifically the Jewish rulers, the folks who headed the Jewish ruling or religious system. You can kind of imagine that those particular folks were not too happy about what was going on with the church, which started out uh, in its early days. It was probably dismissed as, well, just another sect of Jewish society. But as that particular sect continued to grow and grow and grow, and actually when it became obvious that it was not really part of the Jewish system. In fact, it probably began to be seen as a rival to the Jewish system. Uh, the Jewish religious executives were not very happy about this. They probably were elbowing Herod to do something for it. Look for an opportunity. Look for an excuse to take these people down because we've had enough of this. And Herod is enough of a politician to know that although these Jewish rulers were probably not held in high esteem in terms of the pecking order of the Roman government, they were powerful enough and they were loud enough to be able to say and do things that could cause the downfall of whoever was in charge of provincial matters in the Roman government. So Herod knows which side of the bread his bread is buttered on, and he just, for whatever reason, lays hands, or as your translation may say, lays violent hands on James. He arrests him, and for no good reason at all, has him executed. And of course, when he checks the next day, Herod checks his polling results, and the polls indicate, hey, high favor, 88%. Said, right on, do this, do it again. So that's what Herod does. He grabs hold of Peter. Who better than the supposed leader of the church? And he does this during what's called the Festival of Unleavened. I'm sorry, I almost said unleaded bread. Sorry. Force of habit. Unleavened bread. Basically, this was a Jewish religious holiday or observance. It was the 7 days following Passover. Gives you an idea of the time of year that was going on. And of course, because this was one of the high holy observances of the Jewish religion, this was when a lot of outsiders were in Jerusalem. It was a high moment in Jewish activity. Not only the locals, but a lot of folks coming in from out of town. Herod probably would have been happy to execute him immediately, but on second thought, if I do this right now, too many outsiders in there, too many folks who might be shocked by what has happened, too many folks who might actually rise up and start a riot. And I'd have to put that down. And depending on how bloody that is, what will Rome think? So Herod holds Peter in prison. Not for all that long. His intent was as soon as the religious festival is over, he'll bring him out, and very likely he intend to put him to death just like he did James. Now, the interesting thing about Herod is that he's not Jewish. Although he is supposedly, the reason he's called king is that he is theoretically king of the Jews. He's not really Jewish. He is an Edomite. That makes him a first cousin of the Jews because the Edomites descended from Esau, Jacob's brother. But as time went on, the Israelites and the Edomites didn't get along so well. But strange as it may be, Herod winds up king of the Jews. And so the thought is, okay, we'll keep things quiet. We'll observe all the niceties during the religious festivals. But as soon as that's over, Peter's coming out, and he's not going to have his head attached to him very long. During this time, verse 5, Peter was kept in prison, but the church was constantly, it was earnestly praying to God for him. Interesting word that in the original Greek, that's translated earnestly praying or constantly praying. That earnestly comes from the Greek word ektenos, which means stretching a muscle to its limits. Like, if you're reaching over or you're reaching up to a shelf in your kitchen to get something and it's just out of reach, a pot or a pan, I really, I guess I could get a ladder or a stool or something, but that's just too much trouble. Maybe if I stand on my tiptoes and get this, and you stretch yourself to the max trying to get that pan, and as you're sliding it out, you just hope that there's nothing inside that pan that's going to spill out and land on your head. That kind of thing. Tense, putting every ounce of energy, just stretching things to the max is the intent of that Greek word. And that's used to describe how hard and how constantly and how earnestly the church members were praying for Peter and for his release. Well, the story goes on. The night before Herod was to bring Peter to the trial, he was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Now, keep in mind, not just those particular soldiers, but there were other soldiers stationed outside this particular prison cell. Luke says it was 4 squads, 4 soldiers each, 16 soldiers. 16 soldiers. If you want to make a doo-wop song out of it, that's a lot of people to station around one man. And Peter was basically in almost an impregnable prison cell to begin with. Life in a Roman prison was not very nice. We are very concerned these days about prisoners' rights, and we should be. But back in the day, back in first century Roman Empire days, that was on the south end of a northbound list of priorities. What, taking care of prisoners? No. Most prisoners, basically the prisoners were the prisons themselves were just awful places to begin with, and they were awful by design. There was a purpose in putting people in prison back in the day. If you were arrested and put in jail and put in a Roman prison, they figured you were guilty already, and there was no point. In fact, the trial, any kind of trial, was more often than not just kind of a show thing. It was a pretense. It was a process to just go ahead and already find you guilty. And the more liberal, progressive thinking about prison sentencing was the more humane thing. If you're going to sentence someone like that, and you could go to jail for something as simple as falling behind on your car payment, your chariot payments. If you didn't keep up, if you didn't pay all your debts to society, oh man, you could go to prison for that, and you could go to prison for a long time. And if you were found guilty, if you had a really open-minded, liberal, progressive kind of prosecutor, they would say, let's do the humane thing. Rather than stick him in prison for life, let's just put him to death. It was, to call prison horrific was probably an understatement. More often than not, you were thrown in with other prisoners. Some had been flogged. Probably many of them had been flogged or otherwise beaten. The cells were dark. They had no ventilation. They had all sorts of put it politely, vermin running around in the cell. Not a happy place to be. But here we have Peter the night before, he's in that quagmire, that squalor of a prison cell. And he knows what's waiting for him once he gets brought to trial. He's seen what's happened to James. What's he doing? He's sleeping. Why is he sleeping? Well, could be from exhaustion, physical exhaustion. It could also be, hey, you know what? This is out of my control, but it is in the Lord's hands. So whether I'm alive physically tomorrow, or if they put me to death, they're just punching my ticket to meet Jesus, and maybe that's enabling him to sleep. But he is sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains. His wrists are manacled. So physically, there's no way he can get up or escape from the cell. And of course, if by some chance he did, there are other guards waiting for him. There are at least 14 other guards that are going to be around with instructions to make sure Peter does not escape. So physically, under human processes, there's nothing that can be done for Peter. But supernaturally, verse 7, Luke says, "Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell." Probably something that was very remarkable in this very, very dark cell. He struck Peter on the side, woke him up. Loose translation, he struck him on the side of the head. "Hey, Peter, hey, wake up and get up," the angel said. "The chains fall off Peter's wrists." These are manacles that, hey, no way you could open them by yourself. And probably even if you had the key, it would be very difficult to open them up. But they just kind of like melt like butter, disappear from Peter's wrists. They fall off. That's not all. Verse 8, the angel said to Peter, "Put on your clothes and sandals." Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison. But he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. He was, hey, Peter has already seen this spectacular vision. Remember the blanket with all the animals that he saw not once but 3 times? Peter may just be thinking, hey, okay, yeah, Lord's entertaining me again, keeping me preoccupied before what happens. But things keep going. Peter not only passes out of the cell, but they pass the first and second guards, and they come to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself. It opened by its own accord. Very interesting. The original Greek for that word opening by itself is automate. Gee, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? We have so many automatic things that work automatically. Of course, you push a button or you program it or whatever, but so many things that we just don't have to physically do because the machine or the process works automatically. That's the way the gate worked here. It opened automatically. And Peter didn't have to have a key, didn't have to know the secret code to punch in. They didn't have those back in the day, but opened by itself, and they entered the city. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself. He realizes this is not a dream. I'm not just imagining. I'm not hallucinating. This is not a vision from God. This is the real thing. I'm out of prison. I'm back in the city. And he says, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches." I love that phrase. and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. Well, that's an interesting phrase. Everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. Peter is Jewish. He didn't lose his ethnicity when he joined Christ. What he means, obviously and specifically, was the Jewish rulers who were egging on the persecution of the church. They wanted something to happen to Peter. They were rejoicing over James' execution. They were hoping the same for Peter. Looks like it's not going to happen now. Verse 12, when this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. This was probably where all the praying was going on. John Mark, we have met him before. He's probably not much more than a teenager. Maybe by this time he's in his 20s. He's the nephew of Barnabas. He was also the assistant to Peter, so there's a little bit of a connection there, which is probably why he went to that house. Interestingly enough, Mark is regarded as kind of like Peter's biographer, and it was his recollections of what Peter told him that may have laid the basis for what is the Gospel of Mark, which was the first of the Gospels to be written. And so, but Mark wrote it. It's not the Gospel according to Peter. A little interesting tidbit here that has absolutely nothing to do with our narrative here. Mark, of course, is the young kid, the teenager, who during the scene at Gethsemane, when they arrest Jesus, there's this kerfuffle. Somebody lays hands on Mark, and all he has on is this linen garment. And when he gets away, when he escapes, runs away, the garment rips off, and he runs back to his house naked. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I remember this. There was this big rage about streaking back when I was in college and at Abilene Christian. The big joke was, and usually this came from the Bible majors, hey, the Bible approves of streaking. Really? Yeah, look, Mark 14, 51, 52. And, big joke, big laugh. Of course, the Bible professors were obligated to say that, well, no, I wouldn't say that. And kind of try to set things straight. But, Mark had a very interesting relationship. We're going to learn a little bit more about Mark. He's going to bubble up a little bit later in the Acts narrative. But here, he's at home, or at least Peter has gone to his home, where the prayer meeting is going on. And Peter knocks at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. One more little sidebar, and if you'll indulge me, every time I see these names in adjacent verses, Mary and Rhoda, I'm reminded of this TV show starring Mary Tyler Moore, and she lived in this house, and her neighbor one floor below was Rhoda, and so every time I read this passage, I wonder who else was in the church group praying. Were there people by the name of Murray or Ted or Sue Ann or Phyllis? Maybe there was a Mr. Grant. Anyway, I just I that goes through my head, and pardon my levity, but anyway, there's a church group praying earnestly. Please, God, do something. Rescue Peter, help him, really, deliver him from these people. And here's Peter banging on the door, or at least on the gate. Rhoda, the servant girl, comes to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, Peter is at the door. Now that in itself is kind of humorous, but look at the response. Verse 15. And this comes from the people who were praying earnestly for Peter's release. What is the response? You're crazy. You're out of your mind. You must be beside yourself, they told her. But she kept insisting that it was so. Look at the response here. Well, then, it must be his angel. It can't be Peter in the flesh. Jesus were there physically. He probably might have said, hey, guys, oh, ye of little faith. Gee, what a rebuke. Although it's a funny rebuke. I'd love to see this dramatized sometime. You could really play it up for the comic effect. Peter, bless his heart, verse 16, kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Answered prayers. Gee, amazingly, God has answered the very prayer we were sending up to him. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet. I imagine there was no little amount of shouting and going on. Hey, quiet down, guys. So Peter motions to be quiet, and he described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Tell James and the other brethren about this, he said, and then he left for another place. James? Hey, wait a minute. Wasn't he the guy who got executed? Yeah, it was that James, the brother of John. We're talking about a different James, who's the half-brother of Jesus, and who is pretty much in charge, or will be one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. So Peter's kind of a man on the run. He figures maybe I'd better get out of Dodge here before they realize I'm not there. And of course, sooner when daybreak comes, that's what happens. Verse 18, in the morning, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. Oh, yeah. Don't you know? You know, when the soldiers finally come to, and especially when Herod sends his emissaries, okay, it's trial time, bring Peter out. Oh, well, we have a slight problem, sir. Peter's not here. Well, where is he? Well, we don't know. Well, don't you think you better do something about that? So they conduct what Luke describes as a thorough search for Peter. Well, maybe Peter was just moving around. Yeah. Keep in mind, Peter entered the night chained not just to one, but two prisoners. He was manacled, chained at the wrist, and very likely he was chained to the wall as well. I mean, there was really, he had limited movement, but where would he have gone? Where could he go? There was no sign of breaking or entering. Well, there is a solution when you have a missing prisoner in Roman society. And basically it works like this. If you're a Roman soldier and you are put in charge of guarding a prisoner, hey, see that guy? Keep an eye on that guy. I want that guy at trial in the morning. Make sure he doesn't escape. Make sure nothing happens to him. And probably 99% of the time, that's what happened. Prisoner was delivered, and whatever was going to happen to the prisoner was done to him. What about that 1%? What about this particular case where Peter, for no human reason, has disappeared, nowhere to be found? Hey guys, you had one job. That was to guard Peter, safeguard Peter, and deliver him to trial the next day. Where is he? You can't find him. There's only one outcome, which is you wind up paying the price that the prisoner was originally going to pay. And if that meant Peter was going to be put to death, guess what happened to the guards? All 16 of them. After being cross-examined, and I imagine the cross-examination of the guards was not very nice. I imagine they wound up in as bad or as worse shape of any kind of prisoner who had been beaten or flogged. And then after that, they were executed. And that is the end of that little story here. Peter is actually is going to disappear from our story for a while. He'll bubble back up in chapter 15. But he is off doing other things, as well he should be. But one lesson, one thing to think about, maybe spend some time thinking about. We put an importance on prayer. Anything that comes up, anything that happens to us personally, or to friends or our members of the church or relatives, or our first thought is, let's pray for them. And of course, well, we should. But how often do we pray not expecting God to answer our prayers? And, sometimes, God does answer our prayers. Sometimes it's not the answer we expect. But sometimes we don't get the answer we desire because of a lack of faith. And if we pray faithlessly, what is God to make of that? So think about this week while you're praying, what you're praying for, and how earnestly you're praying, and how faithfully you're praying. If you're praying with an expectation that God is listening and God will deal with your request. Although it may not be, you may not get the answer that you're expecting, but more often than not, you'll get if he doesn't give you exactly what you're asking for, he'll give you something better. That's our lesson. Next week, we're going to look at the rest of chapter 12, and we're going to talk a little bit more about good old King Herod. And I use the good sarcastically. We're going to learn a little bit more about the line of Herods and how Herod was kind of a brand name for tyrannical, despotic leaders. But we're also going to find out what becomes of Herod in the rest of chapter 12. Thanks very much for your time, and if you'll make that part of your study this week, Lord willing, we'll meet back here next Sunday. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful Merry Christmas. Hope you have a wonderful time with your family and members and friends. And drive carefully. Be safe. We'll see you down the road.